Live from the New Jersey Performing Arts Center in Newark, New Jersey. Welcome to the 2017 New Jersey Gubernatorial Debate. Tonight's debate is brought to you by the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, WABC 7 in New York, and WPVI 6 ABC in Philadelphia. Our candidates, in alphabetical order, are Republican Kim Guadagno and Democrat Phil Murphy. Your moderators for this evening are WABC New Jersey reporter Tony Yates and WPVI anchor Jim Gardner.
Good evening and welcome to this debate between the Republican and Democratic candidates for governor of New Jersey.
Over the next hour, the candidates will be answering questions posed by Jim and myself, as well as questions from our media partners, including New Jersey Advanced Media, Univision, New Jersey Spotlight, WBGO, and Rutgers University. The candidates will also answer questions submitted through Twitter.
And we have several hundred guests here in our audience. We have asked them to refrain from applause or any other interruptions. The candidates have agreed to a 1-minute closing statement at the end of our debate, and by prior draw, the first question comes from Tony for Phil Murphy.
Okay, Mr. Murphy, every poll shows property taxes are by far the #1 issue for the people in the state of New Jersey. At the end of the year, a 2% cap on raises for fire and police will expire. Local officials in both parties say letting it expire will undoubtedly lead to tax hikes. What will you do in the first 100 days to address property tax relief for the average homeowner?
Tony and Jim, I'm honored to be here tonight with the Lieutenant Governor at NJ.com. This is a great state that has been ravaged under the Christie Guadagno administration over the past 8 years. And the middle class has paid the biggest price. Choices have been made to defend the big companies, and the wealthiest among us in the middle class has been left holding the bag. Schools have been underfunded, infrastructure has been ignored. We're an incredibly unfair state. If one looks at their property tax bill, in addition to the 2% cap question, 53% of one's property tax bill on average in this state is education funding. We will fully fund public education in this state. It's been underfunded by over $9 billion over the past almost 8 years. There's a report coming out in December that will look and assess all sides of the 2% question. We want to make that decision based on facts, making sure we don't have just one side of the argument, but all sides together.
Ms. Guadagno.
And I, too, would like to welcome everybody and thank you for having me tonight. But I want to directly answer the question that you put to Phil Murphy, one I have yet to hear him answer, and that is, I would extend the arbitration cap because it saves the taxpayers of New Jersey billions of dollars, not millions, but billions of dollars. And as I look at the people that are listening here tonight, I know that the #1 issue facing them today is property tax relief. And I know that we have the highest property taxes in this country. And so an answer to the arbitration question is only one part of the answer. What we also have to do is lower property taxes. My platform, quite simply, is to lower property taxes on the people that need the tax lowered the most vulnerable senior citizens, millennials, and working class families.
Again, if I may, I think we should make the decision on the 2% cap based on the facts, which we will do. Property taxes over the past 8 years are up 17%. Incomes in this state are down 5% on average. We have among the weakest economies in the country. Cost to send kids to college is up 20. Health care premiums are up over 40. NJ transit fares are up 36%. So property tax relief is urgently needed for seniors, certainly for the middle class, across the board. Let's make that decision based on the facts. And again, the biggest move on the board we can make is fully fund public education, which has been underfunded over the past 8 years by over $9 billion.
Phil, you know, the facts are in that over the last 8 years, the 2% cap along with the arbitration clause has actually kept control over property taxes. And while it hasn't lowered property taxes, it is still an effort and a means by which we can lower property taxes. People who are listening tonight have a right to know where you stand on the arbitration clause, because they know that if we go back to the days of John Corzine and back to the days of Jim McGreevey, we will see 7% property tax increase over each year, every year.
Okay, Ms. Guadagno, I'm going to follow up with another tax question. Recently, President Trump rolled out his tax plan, and it calls for an overhaul of the U.S. tax code and tax cuts. It also eliminates a key deduction for New Jersey taxpayers. This proposal would end the ability of taxpayers to deduct the income and property taxes that they pay to state and local governments. What is your take on this plan? We'll start with Mr. Murphy.
Well, like a lot of things coming out of President Trump, this is devastating for New Jersey. And the Republican Congress is pushing this at every step of the way. As you rightfully point out, Tony, if the state and local deduction is eliminated, New Jersey is victim state number one. By the way, if that health care bill were to have become law, victim state number one would have been New Jersey. So we need our friends in the Republican Party to stand strong here and make sure that they stand up and are counted. This would have a devastating impact. I think the impact on average for a middle-class family, if this were to go through, is something in the $3,000 to $4,000 per year per family, which is incredibly burdensome in an economy as weak as the economy we have today. So I hope the Lieutenant Governor and Governor Christie embolden their Republican colleagues in Congress, two of whom, by the way, voted with President Trump on this last week, to get everybody to get together on this and make sure this doesn't happen.
Ms. Guadagno, your response.
The president's tax plan has to do with a national basis. In New Jersey, certainly, relief needs to be had for property tax deduction, and that's because we have the highest property taxes in this country. Phil Murphy has no plan for lowering property taxes. Phil Murphy has said in the past that in order to lower property taxes, people in New Jersey need to make more money. Or Phil Murphy has said that in order to lower property taxes, we need to fully fund the school funding formula, which in his own words tonight was $9 billion. Well, I suggest to the listeners out there tonight, or to the people in this room, to look to their right and look to their left, because that $9 billion is coming from you if Phil Murphy is elected governor. The people of New Jersey are taxed enough. We need to provide them real property tax relief, and we need to do it now.
If I may, the $9 billion actually, choices have been made by Governor Christie and the Lieutenant Governor every step of the way. And they've chosen to give out tax incentives to large corporations in our state for over $8 billion. They've chosen to give the wealthiest among us tax breaks. All of that has come at the expense of the middle class. All of that's left this state virtually bankrupt, a middle class that's ravaged. And the reason we don't have the money to fully fund public education or higher education or infrastructure is because this administration has made choices that have favored the big companies and the wealthiest among us. We want to reverse that and get back to getting the middle class on its feet.
Ms. Guadagno.
All right, the first thing we can do to help the middle class is to have a thriving middle class. And the way we have a thriving middle class is, quite frankly, to lower the property taxes. I don't know how many times I'll come back to this tonight, but the number one problem facing New Jerseyans today is property taxes. Phil Murphy has no plan. I have a plan to help those middle class people who need the most help now.
Thank you.
I call them the killer P's, property taxes and pensions. Ms. Guadagno, a generation of questionable tactics by governors and rulings by the courts has put the New Jersey pension system on a potentially catastrophic path, and according to many metrics, the worst funded pension system in America. In the 2020s, we could see the funds for state employees and teachers to be depleted. Do you take, here are some options, do you take a quarter of the state budget to fund pensions on a yearly basis? Obviously impossible. Do you raise taxes, or do you impoverish 800,000 people? These are intolerable choices, but the next governor is going to have to figure out how to deal with this. What's your plan?
Right. It certainly is a crisis, because it has resulted in a crisis in New Jersey. It is to fully fund the pension and health care, we would need $15 billion out of a $34 billion budget. And we know that's just not realistic. I know Phil made promises during the primary that he would fully fund the pensions and fully fund health care. But what I will do as governor is talk about it honestly and openly and sit down and work not just with the first responders but also with the teacher and the CWAs and talk about it honestly. You know, right now we are hiring 21-year-old kids to teach in our schools and promising them a pension that we know they will not have. We need to sit down and talk about it thoughtfully and respectfully and realistically. Honor our commitment to the 800,000 people that are already on that pension, but also talk realistically about what happens to that 21-year-old child because I'm 58, who is going into the pension system right now and will not have a pension.
Mr. Murphy.
We are a state that folks no longer trust. Public sector employees have been left at the altar for 20 years, no more so than the past 8. Rating agencies have downgraded our ratings during the Guadagno administration 11 straight times. We lead the nation in exporting high school seniors, and if that weren't enough, college seniors. We have to get back to being a state that folks trust and respect again. We can't keep leaving these folks at the altar and then keep coming back and saying, listen, I'll meet my end of the obligation if you make more concessions. That's not in the category of a deal as a deal. So we will fully fund our pension obligations, and we'll get there as fast as we can because that's the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do because we can't undo the damage that this administration has wrought unless we can find that trust and respect and strength.
I appreciate the fact that you're saying you will fully fund the pensions. The question is, how will you fully fund the pensions?
We have a very, very credible plan to fund these as rapidly as fully fund the pensions over the next several years as rapidly as possible. At least as fast, I hope a lot faster than this administration has been funding them.
Well, forgive me, I still haven't heard how. But Ms. Guadagno, your rebuttal.
In the primary, Phil Murphy promised the first responders in the public sector union that he would fully fund the pensions. If we're going to start to talk about trust, let's talk about what he just said. What he did say is that he would fund those as soon as he could. Quite frankly, Phil, that sounds like the Chris Christie plan. And I think we need to sit down and talk about what we can afford to do and how we can afford to do it and talk about it honestly. Tom Byrne has a very good plan to make those pensions solvent, but that plan has to be executed, and it has to be executed in a thoughtful and respectful way.
I would just say, if I may, Jim, this is an administration which has vilified public sector employees. Educators should be up on a pedestal, and they've been vilified for almost 8 years. So this newfound compassion, I'd ask the Lieutenant Governor, where have you been? You've been alongside Governor Christie every step of the way for 2,821 days.
There's been a bit of news surrounding President Trump recently. Let's say, and I want each of you to take 30 seconds to answer this question, and then we'll be done with it. You are governor of New Jersey. You have 30-40 seconds with the president in the Oval Office. Actually, we're going to go to Ms. Guadagno first. What would you tell him?
30 seconds?
You have 30-40 seconds with the president.
Okay. Very quickly, I would say please fund the infrastructure that you promised at the beginning of the game. We need the Gateway Tunnel. I think we have trillions of dollars of reasons for getting along with this governor. I liked what he's doing with regulatory reform because that will expand our economy, not just in New Jersey, but nationwide. I love his idea of funding apprentice programs because, you know, one of the problems we have in New Jersey and across the country is middle skills. So I would tell the president, please fund the infrastructure program so we can do the Gateway Tunnel and other necessary programs. I don't know how Phil Murphy's going to make that argument since he's had a fight with this governor since the day he began to run for office.
Mr. Murphy, you have 30 seconds with the president.
I would implore the president, as well as I have every step of the way, to fund infrastructure. But I'd also tell him, leave our dreamers alone. Leave our health care alone. Enough of these tax cuts for the very wealthiest among us. Protect our environment. This is the most wrong-headed president in the history of our country. We're the 10th largest state in the nation. We're the most diverse state in the nation. We have as much environmentally at risk as any other state in the nation. All of the steps he's been taking are damaging real lives in this state. I hope I hope his actions match his words on infrastructure. That's the one area I think I could find common ground on with this president.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to go on to the next question. We asked voters to submit questions by way of Twitter, and this one comes from at Alex for Science, who asks, what is your plan to prevent gun violence, including mass shootings? We're going to start with Mr. Murphy.
Listen, this is a great question from Alex. We have a gun crisis and scourge in this country, and we see it in big events like the tragedy in Las Vegas, but it's also a daily drumbeat in our state and communities up and down this state. I am strongly of the opinion that I would sign all of the gun safety laws that have been vetoed by the Guadagno administration, keeping guns out of the hands of those convicted of domestic violence, gang-related activities, carjackings, making terrorist threats. My 4 kids are here tonight. They have to go through a lot to learn how to drive a car. Folks should have to go through a training program to discharge a gun. We should tighten up our background checks. And 80% of the gun crimes in this state come from guns outside. Let's do something regionally. Last week, when those 58 people, innocent people, were killed, I heard from the Lieutenant Governor that now is not the time. And I would just say it was not the time for them to lose their lives either.
Ms. Guadagno.
So I think we have to start with the following, and that is that 58 people lost their lives last week, and another 500 or so are still in the hospital. So we need to remember that this is not a political problem. This was a heinous act of a madman, quite frankly, and we need to respect that, which is the reason why I didn't make it a political issue last week, unlike my opponent. But if we're going to talk about what we can be doing in New Jersey to avoid insane acts like what happened in Nevada, there's a couple of things you need to know. First, we have the 3rd most restrictive gun laws in the country. You cannot buy a BB gun in New Jersey without a firearms permit. We need greater penalties. We need to enforce the law because most of the gun crimes are done with handguns. We need to have better mental health background checks. And in fact, in the case of a Nevada shooting, I would recommend the death penalty.
I would just say this. You just heard from someone who's got a rating of A from the NRA. I am proud for the first time in my life to have been given an F by the NRA. And I reject completely this business that now is not the time and we're politicizing this. My God, these are innocent people getting killed every single day in our lives. Now is exactly the time. And I would just say the Lieutenant Governor only moved last week after the NRA, of all people, said they would be willing to ban these so-called bump stocks. We've got to get that law on the books in the state. 50 caliber weapon laws. Even if we save only one life, it will have been worth it.
Ms. Guadagno.
You know, I've been a federal prosecutor, a state prosecutor, a sheriff in Monmouth County. No one knows better how to protect people in this state than me. And I don't believe the answer is to take guns out of the hands of honest, law-abiding citizens. I believe that Phil Murphy has to answer the following question. If guns are so bad, why has Goldman Sachs invested in gun manufacturers over the years, and how much has he profited by that investment?
I think if I had your track record and Governor Christie's track record, I'd try to change the subject as well. This is about saving people's lives. This is about saving people's lives. Come on. Let's stop changing the subject when people's lives are at stake.
So are you denying
guys,
that Goldman Sachs and that you had profited
Forgive
off
me.
of
There'll
gun
be opportunities to
manufacturers?
talk about this later.
Let's not change the subject.
But right now we've got more ground to cover. And please, audience, the problem that you are creating is that it takes time for you to express yourself. It creates a delay on the part of the candidates, and we lose opportunities to cover more material.
Less time to change the subject.
All right. Our next question from Mariela Salgado of Univision, and it goes to Ms. Guadagno.
Thanks, Jim. Ms. Guadagno, the Trump administration released a number of demands tied to immigration policies. Among his priorities, funding his promised border wall in exchange for protecting immigrants who were brought to the U.S. as children, also known as dreamers. These young undocumented immigrants have been protected from deportation, as you know, under the DACA program, which is due to expire next March. The question is, what will you do to protect the 22,000 Dreamers who currently live in New Jersey?
Right. In New Jersey right now there are 20,000 Dreamers, or DACA, and they would be impacted by the President's executive order, a withdrawal of President Obama's executive order. So what we have asked and what the President has asked is for Congress to finally fix the problem. It is a congressional issue. As governor, I would use the bully pulpit to encourage our congressional leaders, most of whom are Democrats in New Jersey anyway, to fix the problem once and for all so we don't have this constant uncertainty as we go forward. The one thing we also have to do, quite frankly, as we go forward is make it affordable for them to live here. And the way to make that happen is, quite frankly, to lower taxes. My opponent has said that he would raise taxes on the most taxed people in this country, and that will hurt every single one of those 20,000 individuals as well as their families.
But could you be specific as to what you would do if there's nothing reached in Washington come March 5th next year?
I'm sorry, I did
what
not
would you
hear
do?
I can't hear the question on this
What
end.
would you do specifically if there's no Congress agreement by March 5th next year for the Dreamers?
Well, what I would do is follow the law. I'm a former federal prosecutor, a former state prosecutor, and a former sheriff. And it's our obligation to follow the law. What I would not do is make it more dangerous for law enforcement officers and for people to live in the state of New Jersey by declaring New Jersey a sanctuary state.
Mr. Murphy.
Dreamers, we've got 22,000 of them, are every bit as American as my 4 kids. This is a moral test, black and white. So this is Mr. President, not in the state of New Jersey. We will stand up to this president. If need be, we'll be a sanctuary, not just city, but state. This is America. The America I know is the poem at the base of the Statue of Liberty written by Emma Lazarus in the 1880s. We open up for all to come here. These Dreamers, 91% of them, are either in education or working. They contribute $60-something million of tax revenue, $1.6 billion to the economy. So I will have their back. We will stand up to the president. Hopefully, by the way, his wrong-headed right-wing immigration package he just came out with, which was the price we'll have to pay to keep the Dreamers here, is wholly and totally un-American.
Ms. Guadagno.
How much time? 40 seconds.
You have 40 seconds.
So let's put it very carefully about what backs Phil Murphy has. When asked a question during a live Facebook, he was asked specifically whether he would defend, as part of his sanctuary state, a child rapist who had killed 4 students in an Essex County parking lot by shooting them in the back of the head. I'm sorry, 3 died, 1 survived. He said he would have their backs. I wonder if he would have the backs of the individual who climbed into a second-floor window just 2 weeks ago in a sanctuary city in New Jersey and raped a 6-year-old girl. I will have their backs, and I will keep them safe.
Let us just stipulate those acts and those crimes are heinous, and those people need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But let's with all due respect, let's not tell half-truths or untruths about any of this. And let's stop politicizing. What happened to that little girl, I've got my daughter here tonight, is awful, heinous. Let's call it out for what it is. It's a crime. That person should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But what you're doing is what Donald Trump does. You pit, and Chris Christie, you pit us against them. You cast a pall over entire communities of people. That is un-American.
We have to move on.
Let's go to our next question. This question, we welcome Matt Arco from New Jersey Advanced Media. His question goes to Mr. Murphy.
Good evening. This is a question about unrealistic promises. Mr. Murphy, you've made promises for spending on policies and programs that would need substantially more to fund than your $1.3 billion tax proposal would cover. And Ms. Guadagno, you've promised to cut property taxes by spending $1.5 billion, money that will come in large part by auditing the state government, which suggests that your administration has been sitting on hundreds of million dollars worth of waste over the past 8 years. So, in short, why should voters believe you And why shouldn't voters believe your opponent?
Who's up first, Matt?
Mr. Murphy.
Okay. I appreciate the question. I'll let the Lieutenant Governor speak for her plan. I don't agree with the premise. Our plan is extremely credible. Again, you have to remind ourselves of the state and the frame here. This is an economy that is wrecked, that's been bankrupted, that's been ravaged over the past 8 years. So, and the only winners have been the big companies and the very wealthiest among us. So all we want to do is build a bridge to get back to investing again in what we used to do naturally, the middle class, and those who dream to get into the middle class. So that's funding public education, meeting our pension obligations so we're a state that folks trust again. And that as we grow our economy, by the way, that's the other problem. Not only are we profoundly unfair at the expense of the middle class, we don't grow. We've left, by any average comparison over the past 8 years, $20 to $50 billion of economic activity on the table. I want to present myself as someone who understands how you grow a sophisticated economy in the 21st century, and that's real revenue to fund the sorts of programs you're asking about.
Ms. Guadagno.
Well, really, quite simply, Phil Murphy can't keep the promises that he's made, and it's been reported that anywhere from $5 billion to $35 billion to $65 billion worth of entitlements have been proposed by the Murphy campaign, and it is simply unrealistic. What we need to do what I will do as governor is address the number one problem that is facing people in New Jersey, and you can poll anyone in this room and anybody at home. The number one problem facing all of us is property taxes. So let's deal with the problem that faces them. $1.5 billion is what we estimate it will cost. It will save the average taxpayer $800. That may not be a lot of money to Phil Murphy, a Goldman Sachs multimillionaire, but that's a lot of money to the people in New Jersey who I've met over the last 8 years. They need that help, and they need that help now.
May I say, Matt?
Yes.
Let's make sure we're having a discussion based on facts and evidence and the truth. So you're proving, Lieutenant Governor, along with Governor Christie, that you were Trump before Trump was Trump. The numbers you just referred to as it relates to our plans have no basis in reality. I want to make sure everybody gets that. Number two, your plan's an interesting plan. You've been alongside Governor Christie every step of the way for 2,821 days. If it's such a good idea, where have you been?
May I? Yes. In the
seconds.
last time a Goldman Sachs governor ran the state of New Jersey, we had 9.8% unemployment. And when this governor asked me to be his first, I'll start over, please.
Those are your folks.
Well said.
I'm sorry, the seconds are ticking away.
The last time we had a Goldman Sachs governor in charge, we had 9.8% unemployment. This governor asked me to be in charge of one thing, and that is lowering the unemployment rate. Today, our unemployment rate, even though we are the highest taxed state in the country, went from 9 to 4.5% or a little over. We have more people working today in New Jersey than ever in the history of the state of New Jersey.
Ms. Guadagno, we have to move on.
The problem is people can't afford to live here.
I'm sorry, forgive me, we have to move on.
May I respond to that?
Our next question comes from a Rutgers University student. His name is Chenedu Onyemeobi, and he has a question for Ms. Guadagno.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As a student graduating in May, many of my fellow students are concerned about employment opportunities. This state has a history of students leaving New Jersey for better paying.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Hard to hear.
Are you having a hard time hearing? I can't hear the question. We can't hear the question.
All right.
Sorry, I don't want to be rude.
Chenedu, why don't you just walk right up to
There
Ms.
you go.
Guadagno,
I'm
and
all
we'll
right.
get it.
Come on, Chenedu.
I don't bite, baby. How are you? How are you? I'm kind of tied in here, so.
Just
Yes.
do what you have to do.
Here, come a little closer. Here we go. Here we go. Speak into the
Make sure
microphone.
they both can hear you, because they'll both answer you.
Careful, my husband. My husband is in the front row. All right. Can you hear, Phil?
I can hear.
All right.
Go
here we
ahead, guys.
As a student graduating in May, a lot of
Yes.
my fellow students are concerned about employment opportunities.
This state has a history of students leaving New Jersey for better paying jobs in school. As governor, what steps will you take to assure that this trend of mass migration stops and we are rewarded opportunities in the state?
Absolutely. So, thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, got to give you a shake here, man.
Yeah, he's a good sport. So the answer to your question is very simple. We need to continue growing the economy by making it more affordable for you to live here. We have spent billions of dollars in terms of growth, in terms of building buildings in the state of New Jersey, $1.6 billion. So there's more seats for more people to go to school. We need to work harder to make sure school is more effective and more affordable for you. And then when you come out of school, you need to have opportunities. And the way to do that is to lower the cost of doing business in New Jersey, to lower the cost of living in New Jersey, and to make sure people can afford to live in New Jersey. My opponent's idea of living in New Jersey and lowering the cost of it is simply to make more money. That's not realistic in the world that we live in. My opponent's idea of lowering property taxes so you can afford to stay here and find a job here is to put $9 billion back into the school funding formula. All of you will have to pay more for that. So we need to continue to address the problems of government and of jobs in New Jersey.
Ms. Guadagno, we have to move on. I'm sorry.
Right.
May I? First of all, great question. Before I get to it, the reason why our unemployment rate is so low, everybody's is lower, is we're at a 10-year low of labor market participation. And talking about the last governor after being there every step of the way alongside Governor Christie is like talking about something that Grover Cleveland did. At a certain point, you got to own the record. Sir, great question. We lead the nation, as I said earlier, in exporting high school seniors and college seniors. We got to get a stronger, fairer economy that works for everybody, in particular the next generation. The two big economies that we think we can grow are the infrastructure and the innovation economies. And I don't mean just the big companies. We have a lot of talk about Amazon and the big companies, but also I mean the smaller startup cultures. We were Silicon Valley before there was a Silicon Valley. And under this administration, we've lost our edge. We have 15 incubators in New Jersey. New York has 179. That doesn't happen by accident. Those are policy choices. We've ignored it. They've embraced it. We're going to do a lot more of that in your future.
Ms. Guadagno.
So in 40 seconds, let me tell you this. We, in the most taxed state in the country, have been able to cut the unemployment rate in half. There are more people working here on average than any place else ever in the history of the state of New Jersey. But what we do need to do is pay more attention to small businesses. If we're going to have an innovative economy, let's do something like what they do in Israel. Let's create a startup economy, as I have proposed, a state chief innovation officer who would bring together all the resources, public, private, and government resources, to make sure that we can grow organically rather than stealing from New York or Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Phil Murphy, he would cut tax credits. Phil Murphy would raise taxes, and Phil Murphy would make it impossible for businesses to work here.
Please, God, let's get back to telling the truth tonight.
Mr. Murphy.
May I just say
can we let this poor guy sit down?
The labor market participation is at a 10-year low, and with all due respect to your focus on small businesses, we have fewer small businesses in New Jersey than the day that you and Governor Christie took over leadership in the state. Those are two pesky facts, but they're true.
I need to respond.
I'm sorry, forgive us.
Well, then we'll fact check it on Twitter.
Thank you. Our debate will continue right after this commercial break. Stay with us.
That we are the most segregated, among the most segregated states in the nation. And there are many reasons, but the two principal reasons are underfunding public education. I know folks don't want to hear that, but that's ripping it out of the hide of the middle class and the folks who dream to get into the middle class. I grew up working poor. My dream in life was to be comfortably in the middle class. So underfunding public education and kicking the affordable housing can, unconscionably in my judgment, down the road through the courts over the past 8 years. So with all due respect, getting those two policy areas into the right place and funding them are a big reason to a big way to get out of the segregated state we're in. I think you can incent school districts and communities to share services. as opposed to hit them over the head with a stick. I believe that actually can be done and will be done if we get there.
Ms. Guadagno.
I think we have to demand that school districts do it, and not just school districts. I mean any public service. Towns should consolidate, police departments should consolidate, fire departments, career fire departments should consolidate. Anytime we can streamline government, we should do it, and we should do it now. Because people in New Jersey cannot afford to continue to pay the ever-increasing cost of property taxes. Under Phil Murphy's plan, he's going to not sign the arbitration clause. He's got all the facts he needs to make that decision now. We should demand, the people of New Jersey should demand to know whether or not he's going to sign that arbitration clause, because if he doesn't, you know, taxes are going to go back to the rising that we saw under John McGreevey, a 7% rise every year.
Mr. Murphy.
May I just say again on consolidation, and this is a big opportunity. Where have you been? 2,821 days. You're there. I'm trying to get there. You're in the seat. And there is a real opportunity. We actually have put together a plan where we would have a shared services and potentially shared district czar. It would take two parties that were willing to look at it, would fund it, and if they wanted to execute it, would have to execute it.
Mr. Murphy, we have to leave it there. Tony?
Thank you so much. Our next question comes from Twitter. It's the question to Murphy on transportation. This is from Renaissance Dues, and that person wants to know, how will either of you reform New Jersey Transit and the Port Authority? And we add to that, critics say the system is mismanaged and in need of upgrades. What would you do to fix this? Would you be willing to raise fares? And we will start with Mr. Murphy.
The answer is there's no reason to raise fares. But let me just frame this with the following observation. You would think, you have to look at the hand you're dealt as a state. You would think that if you're dealt the following hand, fourth smallest state geographically in the country, the densest state in the nation, sitting beside the largest market in the world in New York and one of the largest in the country in Philadelphia, the one thing you'd get right if you screwed everything else up would be commuter rail. Apparently that's not true, and we shouldn't be surprised because this administration, the Christie-Guadagno administration, have made choices. They've underfunded NJ Transit by 90%. We need to get the funding back in. They've put folks in there to run it who don't have a background. Fares are up 36%. Tolls over the Hudson up 88%. Is your experience up 36%, I'd ask. We need real leadership. We need transparency at the Port Authority, and we need a governor who will punch at our weight to get our fair share of the projects in that organization.
Thank you, Ms. Guadagno. We're going to ask for your response, and after that, we're going to move on to the next question.
As a working mother, I had to take the 546 train out of Little Silver to get to court on time, or I got a judge really mad at me. Then I had to get a train home on time, or I got a babysitter really mad at me. So I know what it means to make sure that the trains run on time. If not, we all get in a lot of trouble. The number one problem the governor has to be responsible for is making sure the train runs on time. Now, the inconvenient truth for Phil is that Chris Christie is not on the ballot in November. I am.
Good.
Keep talking. Your time is ticking.
And what I would do, Governor, is quite frankly be disruptive. Tear it apart and put it back together again. Audit every single thing that goes on in transit, whether it's in transportation or transit, and make sure people are getting their money's worth. People don't believe they're getting their money's worth, and there's no evidence that they are. Let's go back and audit it and redo it all together.
Thank you.
We're going to go on. We're running out of time. You want to cover more material. Our next question comes from Doug Doyle of WBGO, and it goes to Kim Guadagno.
When it comes to climate change, both of you have said, if elected, you would have New Jersey rejoin RGGI, or the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. I was fortunate to only be a renter when Superstorm Sandy displaced me in 2012. However, many homeowners had little choice but to rebuild or elevate their homes. With so many powerful hurricanes missing us this season, but serving as strong reminders, at some point, does the cost of rebuilding and shore protection exceed the benefit it produces?
Yes, I think it does. To answer your question, I am a Sandy victim. I lost a third of my house. Both houses on both sides of me were destroyed by Sandy, so I know exactly what you're talking about. We do need to go back and reevaluate whether or not we're resilient enough, which is what we've been doing in places like Sayreville with the Blue Acre program. I think we need to do that. I think the problem we have now is that we have to get away from an economy that builds houses and encourages the building of houses in areas that are at risk. Having said all that, I want to talk a little bit about the RGGI program you talked about. You know, in New Jersey, what we need to do is focus on our renewables. And the only way we're going to focus on our renewables is if we get together and start talking about the #1 problem in New Jersey, and that is job creation and the cost of living in New Jersey. We're not going to be able to bring an ecosystem to New Jersey to develop those renewables, to take the place of things like Oyster Creek when they leave, if we don't start making it less expensive to do business here.
Thank you, Ms. Guadagno. Mr. Murphy.
Whether it's the last question, Jim or Tony, on NJ Transit, or this very good question on Sandy in the environment, Chris Christie's record is your record, Lieutenant Governor. You've been beside him and with him every step of the way. We can't deny that. On this particular issue, on the environment, this is an administration that pulled us out of RGGI, that could have pressed the button and made us the leader in offshore wind in America, if not the world, and chose not to. We now have a solar industry that used to be a national leader, which has slipped. We've got huge environmental justice issues right here in Newark, as an example, with little kids who have 4 times the rate of asthma because this administration has turned their back on them. So we need an administration and leadership that understands how you do good and do well, how you embrace the environment, not just only to have a stronger state from an environmental standpoint, but a stronger economy. And the fraud and the letting down of folks, I've sat with them in Ocean County after Sandy is unimaginable.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our next question is from Matt Arco from the New Jersey Advanced Media. He returns with a question for Mr. Murphy.
Hi. Concerning marijuana, what does the state look like in the next 4 years under your administration? Are we talking about recreational marijuana shops up and down Main Street in the state? Are we talking about total decriminalization where police are no longer arresting for possession? Or can voters expect to see the state and the climate of where we are right now? In 4 years, what can voters expect to see under your administration?
So, Matt, the most important frame in which we have to talk about legalization of marijuana is the social justice frame. And I say this as much as a former national board member of the NAACP. We have the widest white, non-white gap of persons incarcerated in America. We need comprehensive criminal justice reform. It's not the only thing we should do or can do, but low-end drug crimes is the biggest contributor to that disparity. So that's the reason we want to legalize marijuana, not because we can make money off it, which is the last reason. Secondly, I'm very happy that we're not the first state to have done this. To answer your question, we talked about this recently. Colorado, Nevada, Washington, Oregon, soon California. We'll have other models of states that have done some things smart and done some things that aren't so smart. How you regulate it. Do you take the liquor model as an example? We still have to work through that, but we've got to get it done right. Not only do we need to do it for social justice, but it must be done right.
Thank you, Ms. Guadagno.
There's a very less intrusive way to solve the social injustice problem than legalizing drug dealers. And I'm wholly opposed to legalizing marijuana. Having said that,
please keep talking. Your time is ticking.
Having said that, I do believe we can decriminalize it. And that would solve the social justice issue that was just raised. And I also would expand the medical marijuana program. It's onerous. It's hard to work with. It's not available to those who it should be made available to. But the one thing I would not do is legalize a controlled substance and enable drug dealers in a state where we have 3 times the national average of overdoses as a result of drug overdoses. I would not legalize it just to raise revenue.
May I just say, if
forgive me.
Okay.
We have another question, though. The enrollment period for ACA begins November 1st. It was reported today in the New York Times that the Trump administration is slashing funds for New Jersey's enrollment counselor program. They're called Navigators by 62%. That is one of the hardest hit states in America for this cut of this program. How would you replace the money that the Trump administration is asking or is taking away? How would you help 300,000 New Jerseyans who purchase health care on the marketplace in the absence of many of these navigators, these enrollment counselors?
Well, we've actually added 530,000 people to the rolls, and it has always been my position under the waiver. It's always been my position that we should work very hard, no matter what replaces it, and no matter what we call it, to be sure that those 530,000 people don't have the rug pulled out from under them. We need to make sure that they get to pick their doctors, and we also need to make sure it's affordable for them. So our congressional leaders have to go back to Washington, like I would go as governor, and fight for what is entirely ours. We're a donor state. Phil Murphy, on the other hand, well, he's a single-payer advocate. He has said that he believes that the government, in particular Trenton, is in a better position to pick your doctors than you are. I don't know about you, but I think that's a disaster waiting to happen, not only because I want to pick my own doctors, and I believe the public that's listening today do too, but also because it's so expensive.
If I had your track record and Governor Christie's to run on, I'd make stuff up too. That includes your comment about single payer. Medical, you also mentioned medical marijuana, Lieutenant Governor. You've been there every step of the way. I visited a dispensary 3 weeks ago in Woodbridge. You and Governor Christie have gummed it up and made it really hard for people who are really sick to get the medical marijuana they need to make their life better. That's part of your responsibility. As it relates to health care, President Trump has been wrong on the Republican leadership in Congress at every step of the way. The Affordable Care Act is highly imperfect. Even Barack Obama would say that, but it's made a huge impact on this state. 800,000 people with health insurance, many for the first time. 3.5 million people with pre-existing condition, just to cite two populations. We have to do everything in our power to push back against this wrong-headed president, wrong-headed leadership in Congress. New Jersey, again, as I mentioned earlier, if that law were to go through, we're victim state number one. We need a governor with a steel backbone.
Mr. Murphy, thank you so much. Our debate will continue after this commercial break. And welcome back to the New Jersey Governor's Debate, live from the New Jersey Performing Arts Center here in Newark.
So the minimum wage in New Jersey is about to go up to $8.60. I want to know about $15 an hour minimum wage. Are you for, against? What's your story? Yes, sir.
I'm for it. It needs to be phased in over a series of years so that we don't give sticker shock to our small businesses and restaurants, but I'm absolutely for it. Even at $15 an hour, 2 household income, 2 dependents, barely at the poverty line. At $8.60, you're way under.
Ms. Guadagno.
Well, it's very easy. That's the first time I've ever heard Phil say that he's going to phase it in. During the primary, he said he was going to just roll it right in right away, and that's been a big debate.
What about
the other thing I want to say,
your view on $15?
My view is $15 minimum wage is going to take away the very jobs that they're intended to protect. At least 30,000, maybe more. It's going to close grocery stores, bodegas, restaurants, and it's going to hurt the senior citizens the most because they're going to have to pay more for their food.
Thank you. That is the time we have for questions and answers tonight.
The candidates will now have 1 minute for a closing statement. By random draw, Kim Guadagno goes first.
I want to talk to the people of New Jersey. I want to talk about that 58-year-old woman, she's my age, who's working 2 jobs, yet still shopping at the food bank twice a month in order to put food on her table. I want to tell her that this election isn't about Republicans, it's not about Democrats, it's about affordability. It's about making New Jersey a place where we can afford to live again. My plan has been simply to make it affordable, of 5% of household income, and also to audit Trenton and get rid of all the waste. My opponent, Phil Murphy, is a Goldman Sachs millionaire who pays $200,000 a year in property taxes. He's completely out of touch with the world that 58-year-old woman lives in. This campaign and this election is really clearly about one thing, and that is whether we can afford to raise our families here, whether we can afford to have our children here, and whether we can afford to have our grandchildren live in the state that we love.
Mr. Murphy.
Only in America could a guy who grew up as I did find himself on a stage like this tonight. I'm humbled and honored. We've heard 2 stark visions, different visions for the future of our state tonight. On the one hand, more of the Chris Christie playbook, where the middle class is hollowed out and ravaged, public education isn't funded, infrastructure is ignored, we become more unfair by the day. Or we could turn the page. We could change leadership that celebrates and rebuilds the middle class and the bridges into the middle class. Leadership that funds public education and infrastructure. Leadership that's inclusive and makes our state fair again for everybody. And again, a state that stands for the right things, like funding Planned Parenthood, signing common sense gun safety laws, and doing something about climate change. If that's the same vision that you have, I need you, and I humbly ask for your support on November 7th.
So that brings us to the end of our debate. We thank you for watching, and we thank the candidates for taking part.
Thank you as well to our partners, New Jersey Advanced Media, Univision, New Jersey Spotlight, WBGO, and Rutgers University, and to our host, of course, the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. I'm Tony Yates at WABC Channel 7 in New York.
And I'm Jim Gardner from WPVI 6 ABC Philadelphia. We urge you to exercise your right to vote on Tuesday, November 7th. Good night.
Good night.